Hello world. Today I have a school event, and so I thought I'd do a little get ready with me, or groom, which is what I think of every time I see GRWM. So I moved the camera a bit and got myself reordered. This is gonna be the first time that I'm making a video that's unscripted. It's not unplanned. I have a couple of topics that I didn't want to go over, but it is unscripted. And I have written most of what I wanted to say in past videos so that I don't stumble. But today I think it's kind of worth doing that, because today we're diving straight into a very kind of personal topic, not necessarily just for me, but for kind of everyone in the world, and that's gender construction. And what better way of talking about gender construction than doing a get ready with me, as I'm literally putting on makeup on my face while I'm kind of reflecting critically about what all of this means. Cool. Okay, so now hopefully you guys are hearing better audio. But yeah, so gender. I'm not going to show the products that I have simply because I don't know what I'm doing. But I will link them in the description below, or I'll put a little kind of description on the screen itself so that you guys at least have access to them. But I'm gonna start with some moisturizer, and I'm gonna start with kind of the queen of, or do I even say queen when we're talking about gender? It's the royalty of gender studies, Judith Butler. The kind of TLDR version of what Judith Butler says is that gender is performative. She emphasizes that it's not just performed, that we're not kind of just knowing that we're performing a role that is man, woman, but that gender itself is a set of traits and characteristics that are constructed by society. And I think the most important part of her argument is that gender is a system of meanings. It's a system of signs, it's a system of behaviors and looks and images that we associate to be either man or woman in the heteronormative understanding of gender. In a lot of cultures and in a lot of societies, that is a controversial claim, that gender is not, natural to our bodies, but that it is constructed by society. But given that I'm from Vancouver and I study in the humanities, for most people I know, Judith Butler, kind of basic stuff. There are disagreements in academia about kind of the meanings behind what she says, but rare is it that humanities scholars kind of hold on to gender as this kind of naturalized heteronormative thing where you can only be a man and a woman and it is based on what you have down there, bam, the end, right? We all kind of know that gender is complicated, and we kind of make a lot of choices around gender and how we perform it, but a lot of choices are also made for us, right? If you kind of look a certain way, or if you don't look a certain way, society is going to judge according to the sets of standards that are already set in society, that we might have some power over, but ultimately is kind of beyond just an individual human being. With that, I'm gonna put on my foundation. Why am I talking about this? And why is this important as I'm putting on my makeup? I actually find that I reflect the most about gender when I'm putting on makeup, because it's not really a daily occurrence for me, and because it's not kind of a part of my everyday routine, I do reflect on it a little more. And so for me, I absolutely agree with what Judith Butler is putting out there. I will say I haven't kind of delved into her studies as much in my that was loud, in my academic work, but in terms of just kind of gender is performative, that part of it, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I personally do feel like that there is a lot of constructedness within gender. I myself identify as a woman. There isn't much non-conformity on my end. I dress as a woman. My hair, my makeup, everything is kind of within that realm. And I kind of have a lot of trouble with the idea of conformity being kind of complicit with the system of gender that can be very oppressive to certain people, right? So if you agree with Butler's notions that gender is a construction, and that because it is a construction, there are certain kind of rules in place and there are policing that happens. And if you don't follow certain rules, you are policed, and there's potential violence behind that and bad stuff, right? You know, thing bad, to quote Lindsay Ellis. If I am conforming to the sets of standards that are put forth for me, aren't I feeding into a system that perpetuates kind of gender policing and gender violence against other people? And yeah, that's kind of a thing I do struggle with. I don't want to be part of a system that does that, right? That polices, but am I also kind of not a part of that policing? I think I am. If you think about, like, you know, the weird things that you do as a child, you know, on the playground, or just kind of offhanded comments, or things you do before you realize it, or even after you realize that it's wrong. You know, I've definitely probably like told people like, no, you should be wearing a dress, or no, you're not being girly enough, or no, you're a guy, you should think this way, or something. Like, of course I've done that. And I feel bad about that, right? Like, I don't want to dictate other people's lives. I don't think that's a good thing to do. But at the same time, in my heart of hearts, I like a good dress. I like putting on makeup. And like, I don't know. Am I part of that system? Is resistance maybe the only way of kind of fighting against violence and oppression? I don't know. This next part of me putting on eyeshadow contains some of my theoretical ponderings about gender nonconformity. Now, I was already feeling a little iffy about what I was saying while I was recording this, and although I felt like I was just going about the topic in a theoretical context, I also realized that what I was making claims about had implications in lived experience. There's a major branch of thought in gender studies that values lived experience as providing meaningful insight into gender and identity. And so, since I am gender conformist, I eventually felt like I was overreaching here with my ideas, and so I cut it out. I'll touch on this topic in the reflections, but for now, here is just some time lapse of my lightning fast eyeshadow skills. Let's talk about feminism. Am I a bad feminist? That's a question that I ask myself all the time. I do think I'm a feminist, which is kind of a step up from back in high school. I still think there's a lot of misconception when it comes to who can be a feminist versus who can't, what it means to be a feminist, so on and so forth. But from what I gather, feminism essentially just means you think that women should have equal rights to men. I don't know how to do brows. This is such a light color. Oh, that's not what I wanted at all. Oh no. The basic 101 on feminism, from a person who doesn't study gender studies at all, is that there are waves to feminism. And you know, it would be useful if we pulled up the basic internet to help us understand the waves. There's a fourth wave feminism? Okay. So, according to Vox, I'll link the article in the description below. The first wave of feminism started in 1848. It was based on a very kind of basic desire for women to be considered human beings. Suffragettes, so people who fought for the vote for women, political equality, all that kind of stuff. Second wave feminism started in 1963 to the 1980s. The major idea that was put forth was the idea that the personal is the political. That's the idea that your very kind of existence the things you do in everyday life, being a housewife or taking out the trash or always cooking or staying at home to watch the kids. All of these things are also political and feed into the system of oppression and power imbalance experienced by women. This was the time of kind of resistance, essentially. The idea that if we resisted the kind of traditional roles typically associated with femininity and with women, that might be the road to a better life or equality. Third wave feminism, I think, is the one that I like talking about because I feel like that one's pretty interesting. Vox says it started in 1991 and ended in, I don't know. They don't know. Elizabeth Evans, who is a feminist scholar, says that the confusion surrounding what constitutes third wave feminism is, in some respects, its defining feature. That's quite interesting. Third wave feminism was about this re-embracing of the idea of girlhood, of the idea of femininity, being a woman and kind of standing up for makeup, for clothes that you like, for all that kind of stuff. That is part of empowerment. Given that I was born in 96 and I grew up in the early 2000s, that was the feminism that I grew up with. Very commercial, I would say. Capitalism has re-embraced the idea of girl power and empowerment and commercialized it and commodified it and made it into distinct kind of products that we can buy. And it's almost like you can buy a piece of the pie of feminism. And once you buy it, you're good. You're good. You did your part in society. You helped with the empowering of women, and that's it. So I think there is a lot of backlash. I mean, there is probably backlash with all waves of feminism, but in particular, perhaps the ideas of the third wave feminism and how easily that lends itself to kind of making profit off of the idea of girlhood and stuff like that. So yeah, even though I ascribe to that wave, given my own kind of history and identity and background, that's not to say that I'm not uncritical of it. I think that's maybe the point of what I'm trying to get across, is just that perhaps there isn't a right way of doing feminism, but that one should be critical of where one stands, what one believes in. Onto eyeliner. I don't have much else to say. I wholly misjudged the ratio that I needed between making a video and the time that took to actually talking about my topic. But maybe this is good because, as everyone who has put on eyeliner knows, it takes all of your energy. So I'll just shut up for a second and do this. Oh, as I'm putting this, what seems like a torture device to my eye, let's talk about international feminism. So the waves that we were just talking about, I feel like are very Western-centric and particularly American-centric. Most of these ideas are coming from America. They're based on American history. You know, like the 60s weren't just a time of resistance for feminists. There was a lot going on. There was the Vietnam War. There were pacifists. There were hippies. There were a bunch of different movements that didn't really happen everywhere in the world in the 60s, right? Even in Canada. Not every movement works the same way across the same continent, even in America, probably, right? You got urban centers that were likely a little more active in these kinds of resistance movements, and perhaps rural areas that were not as active. And so, yeah, I think it's important to recognize those differences across the world, and to also recognize that immigrants in particular, or people that are migrant or move through different countries and cultures and borders, they're going to have a different take on feminism and a different historical experience that informs their feminism as well, right? I think recently a text or a show that has reminded me of these ideas and thoughts is Mrs. America. For those of you who don't know anything about the show, it is about Phyllis Schlafly. That's always difficult to say. Phyllis Schlafly, a woman who was against the feminist movement, the second wave feminist movement. Traditionally, in filmmaking, anti-heroes are used to provide a different perspective, and specifically empathy for that perspective that is usually excluded from what we traditionally think of as the good person. If we're positioning Phyllis Schlafly as the protagonist, then we are essentially saying that traditionally she's not the one that gets the sympathy, and that now we have to kind of reconsider the history's perspective from her eyes. And a lot of people would say things like, this show provides a voice for kind of a traditionally underrepresented and excluded group of people, while also kind of very much aligning themselves with the goals of second wave feminism. And I think a lot of people didn't realize that that was kind of a disconnect, particularly with this show, because it was positioning the anti-feminist movement as the thing that we were supposed to be empathizing with, at least at the beginning. Essentially, in this context, we're saying that the people who were against the feminist movement and for traditionalist understandings of femininity were the ones being oppressed. Absolutely, they were. But at the same time, it kind of positions the feminists to be people of oppressive power. And that is an interesting proposition, but I think that's usually not how we considered feminism. So again, moral of the story is it's important to recognize who exactly we're talking about when we're saying people need a voice, underrepresented groups need a voice, and what kind of voice they are getting.
And to also recognize that the non-traditionalist, underrepresented perspective does not always align with the liberal ideals of resistance or subversion, which is often the assumption. In the case of Mrs. America, the show positions the feminist movement as the dominant historical narrative, and the anti-feminist group with deeply conservative goals as the voice of the underrepresented. To then say that the show's inclusion of underrepresented voices is an act of feminist empowerment might come off contradictory. Rather, perhaps the show's most feminist act is the acceptance of conflict among women and a recognition that not everyone was on board for the feminist movement, and that the female perspective remains, to this day, complex, messy, and diverse.
And with that, I'm going to do my hair and go to my event. I hope you guys liked this unscripted piece of mush. But at least it was a little bit of a reflection of how I internalize or kind of apply to my personal self the things that I study. So yeah, I'll see you guys later. And I don't know what this was, but I hope you enjoyed it. Okay, bye. Finish result. All right, I think I'm ready.